Picture the person sitting alone in the corner of a cafe. No laptop open as a social shield, no frantic scrolling to look busy. They're just there watching, thinking, content. To a lot of people, that scene looks like a problem to be solved. Why aren't they with anyone? Are they okay? But for a certain kind of mind, that quiet corner is not a symptom of loneliness. It's home. Liking being alone isn't just a quirky preference. It sits on top of a cluster of psychological tendencies, ways of processing the world, regulating emotion, and building identity that make solitude feel not just tolerable, but necessary. Here are 7 of those patterns, stripped of cliches and wishful thinking, and grounded in the reality of what it means to genuinely prefer your own company. 1. A nervous system that runs loud. People who like being alone are often not bored by the world. They're overwhelmed by it. Psychologists have long noted that introversion and high sensitivity are linked to how strongly the nervous system reacts to stimulation. Noise, movement, multiple conversations, bright lights. What barely registers for some can feel like a constant hum of static to others. Put that person in an open-plan office, a crowded party, or a group chat that never stops pinging, and their brain isn't just a bit tired. It's overstimulated. The mind starts sorting, filtering, defending. Which voice do I track? Which demand is urgent? Where is the next interruption coming from? Solitude for them is not about hating people. It's about finally hearing themselves think. When they're alone, the volume of the world drops. Attention is no longer in survival mode. That's when their real strengths switch on. Observation, reflection, creativity, connecting subtle dots. They notice things others overlook, not because they're detached, but because they need silence to process how much they take in. To someone wired like this, a night alone with a book and their own thoughts isn't an escape from life. It is life experienced at a level of detail that simply doesn't survive in constant social noise. 2. A fierce need to protect mental autonomy. People who like being alone often have a strong sense that their inner life is theirs, and they guard it. Most social interaction, even pleasant, comes with tiny negotiations. What do I share? What do I hide? Do I laugh here? Am I being too much? That's not fake. It's basic social navigation. But for someone who treasures autonomy, this constant micro-adjustment can feel like surrendering pieces of themselves. Time alone removes the need to perform. No facial expressions calibrated for others. No stories edited to be relatable. No real-time self-monitoring at all. Just existing, unobserved. There's a psychological backbone to this. Autonomy is one of the core human needs identified in self-determination theory. People who crave solitude tend to be unusually sensitive to anything that feels like pressure demands. On their time, expectations about their mood, social obligations framed as, you have to. Their alone time becomes a quiet rebellion. This hour, this room, this mental space is mine. No one gets to script it. That doesn't mean they hate commitments or can't cooperate. It means the more they're allowed to keep a protected zone, time, space, inner privacy, the more willingly they engage when they are with others. Take away that interior refuge, and their presence starts to feel like a cage instead of a choice. 3. A preference for depth over breadth in thought and in connection. Some people feel alive when they're bouncing between 10 different conversations. Others feel most alive when they can sink into one idea and stay there. Solitude lovers usually belong to the second group. Their minds tend toward depth. Give them an afternoon alone and they'll trace their thoughts down layers. Why something bothered them, how a memory still shapes them, what a random article implies about human nature. They're not just daydreaming, they're interrogating, mapping, connecting. This depth-driven style doesn't fit well with constant social input. In groups, conversations often skim across the surface. Updates, jokes, quick reactions, those can be fun, but for someone built for depth, they rarely scratch the itch. The mind wants to dig, and digging requires uninterrupted time with a thought. That same preference spills over into relationships. A person who loves being alone doesn't necessarily want no friends. They want friendships with layers where you don't have to reset to small talk every time, where silence isn't awkward, where the conversation can detour into fears, regrets, weird theories. If that kind of connection is rare, they'll choose their own company instead of stacking up shallow, energy-draining social contacts. Not because they're antisocial, but because too much breadth without depth feels like intellectual and emotional junk food. 4. Emotional self-sufficiency that can be mistaken for coldness. Spend enough time alone and you either learn to manage your emotions or you drown in them. People who like being alone often develop robust internal ways of self-soothing and self-understanding. They talk themselves down from anxiety. They process hurt before sharing it. They analyze their own patterns. They may cry, rage, or unravel, but usually in private, then re-emerge composed. From the outside, that can look like distance. You never open up. You're so calm about everything. Do you even care? But beneath that surface, there is often intense feeling, just not broadcasted in real time. 2 beliefs quietly sit underneath this self-containment. Not everyone will understand, and that's okay. I am ultimately responsible for my own emotional state. Those beliefs can be powerful. They reduce dependence on others as emotional crutches and build resilience. But they have a cost. People who like being alone may be slow to ask for help, slow to reveal vulnerability, quick to retreat into their own head instead of letting someone in. They're not made of stone. They've just rehearsed carrying their inner storms solo. If you're close to someone like this, the sign of trust is rarely dramatic confessions. It might be the moment they say, "Stay. I don't want to be alone right now," when they clearly could be. 5. Ruthlessly selective social filters. One of the quiet superpowers of people who enjoy solitude is this. They are willing to pay the price of being picky. Many people keep social circles padded with kind of connections. People they don't dislike but don't particularly resonate with either. It makes sense. Loneliness is scary, and background company feels safer than none. But if you genuinely like being alone, the equation changes. Being by yourself is not the worst-case scenario. Awkward, draining, or shallow company becomes the worst-case scenario. So they filter. They notice how they feel after spending time with someone, not just during. Do they feel more themselves or less? Clearer or scrambled? Calm or vaguely irritated for reasons they can't name? If the answer keeps landing on less, scrambled, irritated, they quietly back away. Fewer texts, slower replies, declined invitations. Not dramatic, just decisive. Solitude is the control group, and anyone who consistently feels worse than solitude simply doesn't make the cut. Psychologically, this looks a lot like high standards for emotional safety and authenticity. It can shade into avoidance if it's driven by fear of intimacy, but when it's healthy, it's a refusal to bargain down their own well-being. To people who need constant social contact, this may read as arrogance or aloofness. You think you're too good for us? In reality, the thought process is closer to, if I can be peaceful alone, why would I volunteer for chaos? 6. A self-concept that isn't built entirely on feedback. We all use others as mirrors. Approval, attention, laughter, even criticism, these are signals that help us answer, who am I to other people? For many, that question is identity. People who enjoy being alone are not immune to feedback, but over time, their primary mirror becomes internal. Hours spent in their own company force an uncomfortable confrontation. What do I think of myself when no one is watching? If they stay with that question long enough, something important shifts. Self-worth stops being tied exclusively to applause, desirability, or number of invitations. They might still enjoy praise. They just don't disintegrate without it. You can see this in small ways. They're willing to work on long, private projects that bring no immediate recognition. They can say no to group pressure, even at the cost of being misunderstood. They sometimes make choices that look strange from the outside, but make deep sense to them. This doesn't magically erase insecurity. Solitude can also amplify self-criticism, but it gives them the chance to build an identity less exposed to the weather of public opinion. Ironically, this inner stability can make them more authentic in social settings. If you don't need every interaction to validate your existence, you're freer to be honest, to admit ignorance, to say, "I'm not up for that." The root is simple. Being alone has taught them they can survive disapproval. 7. A constant, quiet negotiation between solitude and connection. There's a stereotype that people who like being alone don't need anyone. That's fantasy. Human beings are wired for connection, full stop. The difference is how that need shows up and how fiercely it competes with the need for space. For solitude lovers, life is often a balancing act. Stay alone too long, and the mind starts looping, overthinking, rehearsing imaginary conversations, slipping into numb routines. The solitude that once felt restorative becomes stale, then heavy. Socialize too much, and the world blurs into noise. They snap at people they actually care about, feel oddly absent from their own life, fantasize about disappearing for a week. They live between those two cliffs, constantly adjusting. A last-minute canceled plan might feel like a small blessing. A week with no human contact might suddenly feel wrong in a way they can't shrug off. Sometimes they drag themselves to see people not out of enthusiasm, but out of a clear-eyed recognition. If I don't, I'll sink too far into my own head. This is a crucial psychological point. Enjoying solitude doesn't mean never feeling lonely. It means they're familiar with both states and are learning, over time, to read the difference between choosing space and hiding in it. When solitude is chosen, it feels like expansion. More air, more clarity, more presence. When it tips into isolation, it starts to feel like shrinking. Less energy, less curiosity, less courage to re-enter the social world. The people who navigate this well are the ones who can admit, "I love being alone, and I also need you," without seeing that as a betrayal of who they are.